Boom, boom, boom. Here we are live. This is winter workshop about getting to confident consensus around messaging. So hello, everybody. Please give me a shout in the chat if you can hear me and see me. Some reactions coming in. So I'm going to introduce Harsha here in a minute. But before we get into this, I would love to know, why are you here? Can you say like, hey, I'm a product marketer and I'm working on messaging, or I'm this kind of a person and this is the challenge, or maybe you're just bored and have nothing else to do with your life, in which case, I might have some ideas for you. But yeah, I'd be curious to see, what are you looking to get out of here? Why are you here? Barb is a copywriter, working on advertising, product marketer. Yeah. Too many chefs in the kitchen. It's interesting you say it that way, because when I surveyed product marketers maybe a month ago, that exact wording in verbatim was mentioned often as a key challenge when it comes to messaging, because everybody has an opinion. All right, cool. So Harsha and I are gonna pay attention to what you guys are saying here in the chat. So how this all is gonna go is that we're going to start off with Harsha Kalapala talking about his experience when it comes to getting everybody aligned and getting everybody aligned around a single message, and dealing with multiple stakeholders. And then we'll have a little back and forth and do a Q&A. And at the very end, I'll show you how you can solve this issue with winter. All righty. So without further ado, here's Harsha. He's a VP Product Marketing at AlertMedia. So Harsha is a baller. I'm super excited to hear what you have to say, dude. So stage is yours.
Thanks, Pape. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's this topic is near and dear to my heart, and there's a lot of aspects of product marketing, as product marketers in the room would know. But messaging is something that I'm always pumped about, and I'm always excited to learn more, share what I know, and really have a good community discussion around it, because it's never a thing that's done. We're evolving, we're learning how to communicate better and how to cut through the clutter in this busy space that we operate in now. So excited to be talking about what I know today, and hopefully hearing a little bit from the audience as well. Cool. So let's get into the presentation material that I have today. I just kind of put together some of my experiences and what I've learned about getting to a confident consensus. And one thing I want to set the stage with is the main purpose of us even talking about consensus and having all this kind of together is, I think I saw somebody mention in the chat that not having consensus ends up confusing the market. And that's exactly right. There's a lot of people working on marketing, even as a consumer of a product, you can look at a marketing produced by another company. You can tell when things are not cohesive, right? And a company or a brand has an identity and a voice. And all these, as you think about your role on the marketing team, working with marketing communications, working with social team, all that kind of stuff, your audience should see one voice and one story being told. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the back end to make that happen, right? So that's kind of the main purpose of this, why this topic is so important, is getting to consensus for the sake of your audience, your customers and prospects. So let's dig into it. First thing I'm going to come out and say is you don't need consensus on everything, right? Consensus is important. There's a lot of people involved, but when you try to be, accommodating to everyone, you can end up in a very bad place, which is typically seen as messaging by committee. And that is when you start, that's an easy way to take something that's really good and turn it into shit, right? You can easily see the signs of that when there's messaging by committee. And, you must push the organization to get to a point of where you can all disagree and commit. And this is actually a very important lesson I learned in my career that helped me be a better product marketer, is when you really learn not only for you to disagree and commit, but get the team to go towards that kind of a culture. And it's not just in product marketing, it's a great thing to do across the org as well. But especially in product marketing, especially when it comes to messaging consensus, it's important to kind of get to that point of view. So even though I said you don't need consensus on everything, what you do need a consensus on is an approach, right? A methodology and some kind of guardrails and some kind of rules on how we're going to think about messaging. Because a lot of times, the disagreement is subject to somebody's opinion. So, but before you even get into those details, when you start with a framework that you all agree on, then it makes things a lot more, agreeable and smoother as you kind of start to get into the details of the words. And some of you may know this, but messaging is really the middle part of content, right? There's positioning, which really is about how are you positioned in the market. Messaging comes as a derivative of that. And then the copy is more about how do you insert the messaging into content that goes across different channels for your marketing. So when you think about what you need an approach for, is really the concept of having a healthy conversation with a cross-functional team, right? Getting them to come to the table and talk about early on, what does good messaging look like for us, for our customers, for our brand, right? Like our company, AlertMedia, we have to think about, we're in the emergency notification software space. And in our space, we have to think about our tone, because it's, we can't do what, for example, Gong does, where they're very jovial, they're very kind of fun, and they joke around with their messaging and they entertain. We can take some elements of that, but we really the product that we have and the context that we serve is really more, we're in the business of saving lives with emergency communications. So we have to really keep that context in mind and think about our guardrails on what is a good messaging look like for us, which is going to be very different from what good messaging looks like for Gong. So it's really important for you to get that cross-functional team together to define what that messaging looks like for you guys, and present your point of view, right? Come with a point of view because you're the expert in the room, but really be open to the dialogue, invite them in, and make sure that it is something that you bring along your team in the process. And when you set those rules together, that's already halfway to consensus land, right? You're already kind of, when people have skin in the game on how you approach this, they feel like they're part of the solution. So that is, I think, it's really important step to have established on how product marketing operates and what your role and responsibility is when it comes to messaging to help the team get there. So one way to do that is picking a framework. There's so many frameworks out there. These are just 3 examples that are top of mind for me. Success framework: simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, and emotional stories. This is a good framework that I got from Made to Stick book by Dan and Chip Heath. Big fans of their work. And this is I actually have that sticky note on my desk to kind of think about some of these elements of good messaging framework. The LIFT model by Wider Funnel is a really good model as well to kind of help you think about. You can Google some of these and see it. The rich content is my own framework that I developed over time that I try to, even teach others and try to follow myself. Is content that's relevant, interesting, concise, and helpful are some of those checkpoints that you want to have in agreement with your team on. Here's how we kind of come together and create a guardrail set for our team to develop good content that we can all agree on. So when you have disagreements, you point to some of these frameworks and you're like, hey, we agreed on this before. This is our tone. This is our approach to how we evaluate good content. Are there elements missing? And sometimes you end up being wrong in that process, and that's okay. And to recognize that and work with the team. So how do you what's a good litmus test when you think about the indicators of a good messaging structure? 1 second, I think I heard, okay. I just want to make sure I keep an eye on the chat because there's some good comments here, but I also will try to focus on the message here. So a good indicators for messaging structure are number one, this is my perspective, and you may have a different perspective. You may have some additional things that are more important to you. But number one is having audience-centric copy. And this is something I always share with my team is like, think about the fact that when you write the copy, when you see the messaging, it's not about what the product can do for you, but it's what you can do with the product. That becomes an audience-centric copy, right? That message is more about empowerment than it is about product and feature description. And when you just flip that perspective a little bit and just, make sure it is about empowering your audience to do something and accomplish on their own, that puts them at the center of the story. That makes them the hero of the story. And there are so many frameworks and so many theories out there that show that putting the customer and the audience as the hero of the story really helps you find a messaging structure that is gripping and that is impactful. Second one is leading with outcomes. We talked about features and benefits. We've heard about that in the past. Those are important, but they're not the lead. Features and benefits are something that are important, but they come later in the messaging structure. So what are you leading with? Are you leading with the outcomes that the customers can achieve themselves? Kind of tied to that first one, right? It's kind of a extension of audience-centric copy. And then unique positioning. You don't just operate in a vacuum. There are competitors, there's alternatives out there that are talking about the same topic. So is your messaging very similar to what everybody else is saying, or is it unique enough for you to attract that? So using some of these kind of a litmus test checklist to make sure that you test your messaging against. And again, this could be a framework that you could agree with on your team that, hey, here's how we're going to think about messaging. So it's not like different process every time you have a messaging review come up. You have the same process that y'all agreed on that helps you to get to consensus. And that kind of goes into the process topic, right? It is important to have a process, and it is important to understand who plays what role in that process. And every time you have that a new messaging structure to review or a new messaging copy to review, you want to look through what you agreed on in that process as well. Typically, product marketing comes together with a proposal. Here's the content we have. Here's the messaging based on the framework that we already agreed on, and who has input, right? You may be in sales, product, another team, or you may be the CEO. But it's really important to kind of make sure everybody has those expectations that what they're giving is input. They're not decisions. And it's important to have your manager and your team leads back on that, because it can easily become a slippery slope when you start letting seniority and titles kind of judge what or decide what positioning or what messaging is going to be implemented at the end of the day. I try to not tolerate that kind of a decision-making workflow, and it's really important to kind of push your company's culture towards that too. I know it's not easy for everybody in every situation to do, but that is something we should always strive to push as product marketers. Otherwise, our jobs become really hard. An important thing is to not let it become personal, right? So when you come up with a positioning and you invite these other stakeholders into the conversation, you should be okay to be wrong about your point of view and go back to that checklist when somebody points something out. And listening to others' perspective is going to really improve the messaging and also help you get consensus in a better way going down the road in the future projects, in anything. When your partners see that you're listening and then you're able to change your point of view based on, again, those core structure that you're agreeing on in the beginning, it really helps you build that path to consensus and a better process and quicker outcomes. And then picking your battles, right? Like sometimes you don't agree on things, but really important to not try to get all of that your way. And when this is one of those things that help me do more and get unstuck with situations, like we need to understand what are the kind of things that you want to pick, which are the ones that are worth fighting for, so we can move the project forward and also, have that a sort of a team mindset that you are going to work together to get things done quickly and churn things out fast. Now, when you do pick those battles, how do you win those battles, right? first step is to bringing those people into the process. And, this is something I've brought up earlier in the presentation, but having other people be in the process of creating the framework and also coming up with, a draft of the messaging can help you create better messaging with better input. Because a lot of times we are kind of tied, you guys, I'm sure, can relate. When we try to come up with messaging, it's really hard to kind of debate with yourself, which is the right path to go, because there's more than one way to do this right. And it gives them more skin in the game because they have been part of the process and they've felt heard, right? And this is really important to maintain long-term culture of getting to consensus quickly. Now, another part of winning those battles is bringing evidence. Now, this is, I think, the most important aspect of how you win to getting consensus. A lot of times, as I said before, it's opinion battle, and the way to beat your opinion versus somebody else's is to bring data to the table. There's a lot of ways to get that kind of evidence. One bucket is testing your messaging, right? Winter, the host of this event, is a really good product for that. Not just a plug, but I've heard from so many friends that I know as well that are in the industry that this has been helpful for them to really test their messaging and make sure they test their copy. So social channels are an important way to do that organically as well. They're small, bite-sized experiment stages that you can just go in, like pop in a messaging approach that you're looking at and bring that evidence back to the table. Hey, here's some feedback that we can quickly get. Facebook ads can be a good structure for that as well, and test emails. Data, you can get a lot of data from existing content that you've tried on sites, looking at heat maps, looking at where people are clicking, where are eyeballs going, any kind of Google Analytics or website analytics that you have, and testing things to bring that data to the table. And customer feedback. Honestly, this is like a topic for another day, but being super close to customers has probably been, I can call that as the single factor that helped drive the most success in my career as a product marketer. This is a different kind of relationship than what a CSM has with a customer. I think, when I've kind of really focused on that, getting into taking on any opportunity to connect with customers to really open up a channel where you can get their feedback for things like this can be really, really helpful for you to not only understand a better approach, but also gain consensus and being able to bring that kind of insight to the table that, hey, here's how our customers are responding to this. Here's what's working. That, again, helps you bring the conversation in a productive direction. That said, some common objections I've handled in the past on messaging. One is talking about length. I'm sure some of you may have heard this from others. Hey, the copy is too long. There's too many words. Like the first feedback I've had, I've done this with, other marketing leaders that I worked with in the past that said, this email is too long. Or sales leaders that ask you to keep your slides to no more than 3. And I always this is one of those objections where you can talk about copy. This is my point of view, right? Copy can't be too long, only too boring, right? Like you can have a half a page of copy that is really hard to get through and really understand. You got to decipher everything you read in your mind to make it conversational language. Or you can have 3 pages that you breeze through because it's like really interesting and one line leads you to the other, and it's all really coming together and helps you learn something, and it's entertaining. Now that can make a big difference. So really bringing those insights back, and when it comes to slides, for example, limit the time. How long does it take to make your point, not how many slides you have, because there's different presentation styles, like a Pecha Kucha presentation that some of you may have heard of, where it is, I believe it is, I don't remember the exact number, but it's something like 20 slides in 20 seconds. Or I'm getting that wrong, but you can Google Pecha Kucha. I've used it in the past. It's been a while, but my point is there are presentation styles that use a lot of slides to make a point. You've seen Steve Jobs presentations when he was around that were super effective, where he had 1 word per slide, right? So being able to communicate your message effectively is the most important thing. And that's a kind of pushback we can have by proving and showing examples and results from that. One recent example, I was working with a marketing leader, and they were talking about how my email was too long, and the goal was to get some signups for a early access program that we were launching for a product. And I kind of convinced this person that here's the reason why the email will work, and just tested it out. And we got really good open rates, really good CTA clicks and replies. So that's the best thing you can do, is like to battle opinions, is to take some evidence back to the table. The second one is language. Hey, this is not the right grammar, or that's not professional. Sometimes, we're going into a world where marketing isn't about grammar, right? It's really about psychology, and the way we talk today is moving further and further away from proper grammar. But that's okay, right? There's an argument about, I totally agree that you shouldn't put typos on your website copy, right? Typos are distracting. And there's also a difference between grammar that is distracting versus grammar that's conversational. So it's really important for you to kind of understand how to engage the audience, right? The goal is to really engage them. So going back to the guardrails of what is our brand voice, if we're a human, what would we want to sound like to our customer, could be a good way to battle that. And the last objection is, we want to address everyone in the buying group, right? So there's people who will bring up, hey, what about this doesn't speak to this audience or that audience? And when you try to write messaging to everyone, you write to no one. And that's really important to kind of focus the team back on who is our core buyer persona, or who is the persona or the audience we're trying to target with this copy and this messaging, and what's the one objective of that. So there's a lot of, these are just 3 examples that came to mind, but there's so many different versions of this that we all face. And I think, again, going back to frameworks, going back to the way and the approach is the better way to battle this. So finally, to kind of wrap up the things that we've learned today, is that, number one, remember, it's important to disagree and commit, right? You don't want to end up a place where messaging is done by committee. And number 2 is to agree on the approach, not necessarily the words, and not necessarily have a battle of opinions, and to use frameworks and sound decision-making process to come to that consensus. And you got to, there's a military saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So you kind of slow it down a bit, work on the foundations, so we can then don't have to repeat the same kind of challenges every time. And number 3 is using evidence. The best way to battle opinions is to bring data to the table. So being able to find that data, no matter where you can get it from, whether it's message testing or from tools like Winter or other methodologies, really one data point beats no data points at all. So that's really, you don't have to really go super deep into trying to find data. Just finding some kind of evidence, whether it's from a customer's feedback or whether it's from a quick test you ran on social, could be really helpful in getting people on the same path internally. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I know, Pape, we can chat about this a little bit and maybe open up some of these areas that I went into.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So what happens now? So I have some questions of my own. But until we, discuss my things here, everybody here, please post your questions in the questions tab, because in the chat they might get lost because there's a lot of chat going on. So, okay, Harsha, typical scenario: CEO says we should say this. Product marketing is no, this other thing. Developers are like, no, say that thing that we just, So everybody has, conflicting interests of what we should say, or even like nitpicking, the specific word we use. What do you do?
Well, the first thing you do is listen, right? Like, you can get consensus without being a good listener. And a lot of times you may think that you're actually done, you don't want to edit this, but it doesn't hurt to listen. And it also helps in the long run that you gain that trust with your team, that you are, open to considering other opinions and you're open to feedback. But once you do that, you may be at a stage where feedback is too late, or you may be at a stage where, that feedback doesn't really consider all the things we need to take, but really bringing them along the journey, educating them in your way, and educating them on your perspective on what good messaging structure looks like. Even if it's an engineer, everybody is just, this stuff is not that complicated. It may be a different perspective from what they're used to on their day-to-day, but helping them become better marketers by giving them a why of your conclusion and your decision, I think is important. So whether it is an engineer or a CEO, bringing them along the process, bringing them along the why of where we end up, I think is really important. And it takes a little bit patience, and that's something that we can all use a little bit more of.
For sure. What do you do in cases where, everybody's participating and you listen and they just have stupid ideas? They want us, use this, jargony B2B language. Somebody in the chat had some great examples here where the people want to say top quality and premier option, this bullshit that doesn't work. Yet some people are stuck in 1997. Then what do you do?
Yeah, this happens like on the day-to-day. It's easy to talk in concepts, but how do you deal with day-to-day situations? A lot of times the evidence is kind of out there. And, I think I saw you post something on LinkedIn recently about how everybody says they have the #1 platform. Or
yes.
Everybody says they have, there's a lot of, it baffles me how many product marketers and just marketers don't look at what competition's saying when they come up with their messaging and get it approved and pushed out there. We try to go so fast, and we unintentionally end up operating in our own bubble, not seeing what's already out there. So bringing some of those commonly used jargony terms that everybody else is using and showing these folks that, hey, here's what's already out there. If we see the same thing, we're just kind of noise, right? We're lost in the noise. So being able to, battling opinions is, again, evidence. It doesn't have to be data. It can be examples like that are bad examples that show that you don't see this, we don't want to be like that, right? When you can agree that we don't want to be like that, then you can agree that we don't want that messaging.
Totally. Last question before we tackle this audience questions here is often a common challenge that I see is companies ignore the competition and they just talk about themselves as if they are the only one doing what they're doing, even though they have, 100 direct competitors. And, I can't understand why email marketing tools lead with send beautiful email newsletters and things like this. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes when a company decides to just go out with, hey, we're a commodity, join us. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in messaging is differentiation. And as I kind of mentioned somewhere in my presentation, that we're dealing with a lot of noise, a lot of players, a lot of Me Too situations in terms of claims for what their product can do. But what everybody can't get right is how to be more empathetic and how to be more human, and building a personality in that process, that resonates with the audience, right? So being able to shift your focus away from all these elements back to that litmus test of, are we relating to our audience? Are we differentiating ourselves? And that's something that is actually quite simple to do, but it's something that we forget to do in the pace of our operations. And hey, there's always very little time. We just got to quickly push this out. And that's fine too. We want to move fast, but when you don't learn from that pace of work, and you're always doing the same kind of things, putting things out fast that are, not the best it can be, it's not a great place to end up in.
Absolutely, yeah. So all the people who are still here, in about 10 minutes or so, I will walk you through my own actual case study of how I dealt with, should we say it like this or like that? Or what does the audience actually care about? And developers want to say this, should we? I'll share my screen and walk you through. But until then, let's take audience questions now. So I'll start from the top. Delia is asking, what are the key elements of a messaging platform? Like tagline, value prop, blah, 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 blah. What's too much, what's too little?
Key elements of a messaging platform. So there's brand messaging and there's product messaging, right? I think for most startups and growth companies, that's not very different because you have a single product or maybe two products. Your product is essentially the brand. With that point of view, they blend in quite a bit. But for a lot of us who are in larger companies with multi-products and different solutions, different verticals that we have to tackle, you got to think about aligning product messaging and solution messaging to that top level brand. So the top level brand has things like your tagline, your mission, vision, purpose, all those things, the brand promise, that are really important to tie these to that. But this really depends on, there's some good frameworks that I've used in the past where you got to understand when you develop those brand elements that are also, quickly passed on to your product, what are the ones that are internal first? What are the ones that are external first, right? A purpose of a brand is more internal. It's more at the company level. It helps you come to work motivated every day to really use that purpose as a North Star. And then your mission is more short-term. It's more achievable. It's something that you want to start with an external display. Like tell the world that here's your mission. Here's what you want to do like in the next year. Your vision is the way you want to change the world. So that is more aspirational. So connecting a lot of those elements, understanding which one has a defined purpose and what those purposes and how that connects back to your product narrative is important. So it's not a standard thing that, hey, every company needs to have all of these things. There's a few things that are important, like tagline, for example. Not every company needs a tagline. Sometimes it's a distraction. Sometimes it helps. It depends on your audience, your space, competitors, whatnot. So really making sure that you don't just use those frameworks as they are, but customize it to your situation, I think is important.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic for sure. Hard to answer in 3 minutes. Tatiana is asking here, what would you say is the link between the roadmap and the messaging? We're launching a lot of features. Should we focus on messaging per feature or bundle them depending on the value they provide?
Well, the answer, I think, for that, like we have a very distinct customer marketing function here at AlertMedia. That customer marketer works directly with two the product marketers that are for individual products. And so the customer marketer doesn't directly interact with the product team, for example. They don't have to, they can. But the workflow is more like the product managers own it and pass it on. So I think in most companies, a lot of the product releases that are quickly getting churned out are more relevant to customers than they are to prospects, because these are smaller updates. These are more about feature updates. I think it's important to bundle them up when it comes to prospect messaging, because you don't want to get into features and that kind of a pitch. You want to talk about top level solutions, top level benefits, why you should buy and why you should create that urgency. But when it comes to marketing all those product releases to your customers to drive adoption, you got to get more granular. You got to get more surgical about how you then translate that objective to drive adoption.
Yeah. I would add here also that you don't need to cram every feature announcement on your homepage for, you have a social media, you have your newsletter, you have your community, dedicated product, product pages, things like that. You want to keep your homepage, which is like the key central place for, focused. What is this company about and why us? All right, next one. Marta is asking, when your stakeholders don't have any marketing knowledge, how do you open up what do you think good messaging looks like and bring them into the process?
Yeah, good question. I think, the best thing we can do is be amateurs ourselves. And I think I heard somewhere this recently, the meaning of the word amateur really means you're in love, right? And which means you're in love with the topic. You're in love with, you're always learning. And I think having that amateur mindset, so we kind of remove the fact that we're marketers, we know marketing. I mean, like we can all argue that we all have a different level, like it's a spectrum, right? Like what you think about what marketing should be and what I think marketing should be will be slightly different. So just fundamentally, our definition of marketing is not going to 100% align. So I think, going back into their perspective, helping them understand the basics of what you know. So we don't talk in lingo, we don't talk in high level stuff that, oh, you should know what top funnel is, you should know what tofu is, right? Like it's okay for them to not know those basics and just talk to them like you would explain it to a third grader. And that's how that's kind of a thing that'll keep you humble, keep you also an amateur in that marketing, and make sure that we stay strong with the foundations and teach people to bring them on at that level. Try not to be at your level and try to get them there. Just go back to their level and just go to the basics.
I would add here, think of good messaging. I mean, if you want to teach people what great messaging looks like, then I would think of it as in terms of cause and effect. So effect is people wanting your product and signing up for a demo, for a trial, whatever it is. And so if good messaging is cause, how can we unpack it? What makes good messaging? And it's really, if we distill it down to components, I would use heuristics like clarity. Do they get it? If they don't get it, they're not going to buy it. Value, the value we're communicating. Do they want that value? Relevance. Are we talking about things that are aligned with their priorities and challenges at hand, their pain points? And then differentiation, as you said. Like, do I get it? How this is different and or better than other options out there?
Yeah, and
so
Dave, it goes back to those. It goes back to those frameworks, the 3 examples that I showed. Right? You can those are not hard to understand. Like, it use simple words. Like, it has to check these boxes. And there's not just words. There's descriptions to each of those if you dig deeper into those frameworks. So for me, for example, concise is one of them. Brief is one of them. Brief doesn't mean it's short. Brief means it removes unnecessary words, but you still get to the point in the shortest path possible. And so there's a lot of simple explanations there that we can introduce them to frameworks that brings them along from that ground level.
Anand is asking, how do we ensure that everyone across the company speaks in the same brand voice? In a large organization, without the right guardrails, often the brand voice tends to get diluted and the brand ends up losing its flavor and sound pretty bland. Yeah.
It's a hard one, man. Like, you can come up with any kind of creating a methodology for it and implementing it on ground are 2 very different challenges, right? And it's not easy, but some of the things we've done in the past, me and my team, is first you got to come up with a very understandable framework, right? Here's what our brand sounds like if we're a human, and here's what we talk like. Here's what we will say and will not say. Give concrete, real examples of good, like the right direction and the wrong direction. A lot of times, getting clarity is knowing what the wrong direction is, and we tend to kind of skip that part. And you also want to kind of put it in front of them, and repeated exposure is really important. So what we did is we came up with a 1-pager, because we had a whole brand book for this company, Level Set, that I used to work at. It was great because we rebranded the company. We started a new name, new logo, new identity, colors, all that stuff. And then we wrote down to ourselves, what does that mean? We were intentional about all those choices. Now that ended up being a really nice comprehensive brand book, but nobody's going to read a brand book unless you're really into that, right? So we made a 1-pager, we printed it, we laminated and put it on everybody's desk. This was before the pandemic. And I'm not there, but I believe they're still sending those as part of their onboarding, is the laminated copies of how to think about the brand. What does Level Set behave like if it was a human? What are the colors for? What colors would you use for what purpose, and what wouldn't you use it for other things, right? So there's it's a constant journey. You come up with the right kind of content, summarized content that's digestible, and you expose people and put it in front of them constantly. You're not going to see a sudden cliff change. It's a gradual change that you'll see that, okay, suddenly 6 months later, you look back and you see that people are now come really far along on how consistent we are.
Totally. And I would add here that the way to check whether you guys landed, I mean, you can have a person who's like the brand QA in the company, but in order to democratize it and remove a bottleneck of a single person, is message testing, where you can put your copy in front of the intended target audience and you ask them, how do we come across? In terms of if we were a person, like describe the personality. And then if you want to come across as whimsical and funny and they say, oh, this is a serious brand, then it's like, it didn't hit the key things here.
Yeah,
all right, more questions. Let's take two last questions. Andrea is asking, it seems to me the frameworks presented are more filters than frameworks. I'm curious, what are the elements that need to be included in your top level messaging?
Yeah. So the elements, let's say, elements that need to be included in your top level messaging. What do you think, Pape? What do you think elements are versus?
Yeah, so I think, and I'm assuming what Andrea is saying, obviously, I'm assuming she is asking what needs to be included. Like, what do you say and what do you leave out? So what I would... how I would go about it is I would start with the category, because always people want to know first thing, what is it? What is it? So you start with a category. We're an email marketing tool.
Right.
We're this, establish this. Then people can come down. Oh, okay, I get what this is. And now you make a claim, like this is the headline or whatever, the claim of your value proposition, a promise of value to be delivered that ideally also communicates your onlyness. So if you're marketing automation, what is why use you, or who are you for? Like, we are for the companies that do this and this. So people, this is for me, or this is not for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I would follow with, you would want to generate the feeling of, well, how do you do that? Or how does it work? So basically that they would want to read the details and when you go into features and benefits.
Yeah.
What do you think?
The message, I think, absolutely should be cascading, right? It should start with, you read just the top level headline, and then you start to put the first piece together. You don't have to read the rest of it to really make sense of everything, right? Every additional piece of information will add to the story rather than kind of complete the story. And that's hard to do because you want to say more in fewer words. That is going to be, completing that perspective. And a good test is to ask my mother-in-law to just look at the messaging and be like, does this make sense to you? Like think out loud. What are you looking at? Somebody who's not in your industry, somebody who should be new to it, should still understand it. And also it cascades, like, let's say you have to address multiple buyer personas, very different products that you have. So at some point after that top level messaging that appeals to everyone, you got to be able to fork out and appeal to the rest, let them take their own journey. Click a button. Hey, this is winter for blank role, and go down that role and be able to choose your path. So, and another important element I would say that a lot of us don't get right is emotional element. Like, what emotional benefit does this have for me to work with your company, right? Like a lot of that pain that it solves. How do you feel as a result of using our product? Like removing frustration, working more efficiently, loss aversion. A lot of those feelings, or the emotional part, is not tapped into efficiently enough. And that is a challenge that I'm constantly trying to be an amateur about and trying to learn about, because that psychology is powerful if we get it right.
Totally. All right. Let's take the last question, and then I'll do a case study walkthrough. What would you do in case your management wants to play it safe? They don't want to experiment with positioning and messaging because they're too afraid they would lose customers. And don't say quit.
I was gonna. No, seriously, really, it's important for you to understand what environment you can work in, because you gotta know what your tolerance is for what you can work with. But that's, I will take that clue of don't say change the company, but try to change that perspective, right? Like if you want to change things, if you want things to change, you got to change things, right? If you keep doing the same thing you did, you're not going to change things. And if most of us have incrementally increasing growth targets, right? If you hit a certain number in the last quarter or the last year, your targets will be different and bigger, or maybe your product mix has changed, or maybe your competitive environment has changed. Change is the one thing that's constant that's happening. And if we don't change the message that we're doing, and we're not going to get to where we need to go. Like, it's not about, again, I understand the fear, especially in larger companies, when changing one small thing can change a lot. That's really where testing comes into play. Like, you don't have to do it all at once for everyone. There's a lot of tools out there, including Winter, where you can like test things out and see if a certain direction is the right one. A lot of things that you do in that perspective can be undone. So I think going back to that,
it's an experiment.
Right. Yeah. Run experiments, go take back evidence with them. Otherwise, it's your opinions against them, and you're never going to win that.
And I think education plays a major role here. Like, people who want to play it safe, so to speak, they're not aware of the costs or the risks of playing it safe. Because people who only want companies that say predictable, boring things, they already have a company and they're not looking for you. They like to cling to their old boring company. These are not the people who are out there looking for new tools, right? And like, why would somebody choose you based on your boring copy? Like, if they look at you and your top 2-3 competitors, yeah. Okay, cool. So because time is running out, we got to move on with Harsha. Thank you so much for being with us, sharing your knowledge. Everybody follow Harsha on LinkedIn. And yeah, peace.
Appreciate the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.